Well, thank you very much. I am just overwhelmed by the turnout this morning. It's the various events that I've spoken at. I'm accustomed to rooms of 30 or 40 showing up. So this is a wonderful experience. I'm certainly very blessed to have this opportunity, not only to be able to come and get to know all of you and share some of my experiences, but more generally as an academic. I am very lucky because I get paid to play every day. Now, don't tell my boss that. That may not go over so well, but I get to spend my day playing with issues of corporate reputation. I get to think about changing media channels and what does Twitter mean, not only for marketing and for society, but what does it also mean for my students and learning. So I'm very lucky in that sense to be able to have these opportunities, and I hope that some of what I share today is in some way helpful to what you're thinking about with regards to social media. Now, when I arrived this morning and started talking with some of the guests as they were coming in, I realized how different an event like this is from the conferences that we may have gone to, say, 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, if you walked into a room, I would have basically known nobody. But today, if I think about all of the folks who have added me over Twitter over the last 72 hours, and the opportunities that I've had to watch what they're thinking about, and what they're talking about and what they're laughing about, that when you meet them at the back of the room, you feel like you already know them. And somewhere in that little experience, I think, rests something very, very important, not only for us as individuals as we brand ourselves in these increasingly knowledge economies, but also as we think about how do we brand our products, our services, how do we manage corporate reputation, how do we reach out to the stakeholders who have an interest, either good or less good, but how do we reach out to them and engage these individuals and use that experience in a way that's not only good for the company and ourselves, but also good for the stakeholders. In thinking about that, I hope you can see this. This is a graph that I recently created from Facebook, and this is my network. I thought that was kind of interesting that we can now graphically portray our networks off of Facebook. And looking in the center, you'll notice there's a lot of ties right here in the center of this network. But interestingly, it branches out many different ways, and it ends up being a very broad and a very diverse network. And in that network somewhere is where I met Nikki, who will be speaking later, and I've been watching Nikki's tweets over the last few days and getting a sense of who he is. But I've also had the opportunity to meet, for example, an individual by the name of Mitch Joel. Mitch is in Toronto, and Mitch has a podcast which is called 6 Pixels of Separation. He maintains a blog also called 6 Pixels of Separation, and he's really an incredibly dynamic guy. He has all of these great stories to tell, a lot of energy, a lot of passion for these digital media channels, and I said, Mitch's work is great. I have to bring him to Singapore. So I send Mitch an email. We talked on the phone, I believe, twice, but basically any information was exchanged digitally. Mitch had never seen me, and quite literally, I had only seen half of Mitch's face. His photograph on the internet is this very, a little bit of an artistic photograph where he has half of his face appearing. So I'm not even quite sure exactly what this guy looks like. So I go to the airport in Singapore. I'm going to pick Mitch up, and this fellow comes walking across the floor in the airport, and I go, that's Mitch Joel. I knew right away. And when he came out of the doors, he looked at me and he said, when I was walking across, I knew that was you. Which is interesting because I didn't have my photograph on the internet at that time. But the level of interaction, the way you get to know people through these channels is really quite surprising. I was a Twitter skeptic for years, but once I was in there, all of a sudden I realized actually how rich 140 characters can actually be. And it makes me think of this incredible opportunity that we have. So through these channels, you start building this network, and some of that network is going to be very strong or very tight ties, such as what we're seeing here. And all of these folks out here, very loose ties, very weak ties, but that is where the opportunity exists. I remember not too long ago, I was speaking with a colleague, and he shared with me the fact that there's now a list of top people on Twitter in Singapore. Okay. Take a look at this. I have no idea what it means to be a top Twitterer in Singapore, but we're going to take a look at the list. So I did, and I started adding people and started following them and getting to know them in the same way that I have started to get to know Nikki through these channels. Just very simple examples of these loose ties. But in just a moment, I'm going to show you how those loose ties actually played out as I move into my first story. And I'm going to be sharing with you 5 stories, basically leading up to one argument. That the argument being that we have a very unique opportunity in Asia to leverage these channels in ways that we're currently not. And in this leverage, I think, is going to be beneficial to our brands, our reputation, as well as customer service, customer support. There are many, many different applications. But the 5 ideas are very simple. Number 1, I'm going to talk about the importance of networks. Networks like the one which I just displayed on the screen. Second, I'll talk about the ways in which we must adapt in Asia, that the conversation around social media is not the same. It is not the same as we might find in the United States or in Western Europe. And this is a very important fact, which, much to my concern, I think it's overlooked too frequently. We'll also be talking about ways that you can look to Asia for successful examples. And from that, we'll also understand how the media environment has changed, and ultimately, how has search changed? How is it that knowledge workers today not only find and use information, but how is it that people can find you, your products, and your services?